Hello, my name is Natalie Phillips, and today I'm going to talk about post-colonialism in international relations. Post-colonialism is one of my favorite critical theories. So, what is post-colonialism in IR? Post-colonialism studies international relations by focusing on the history of colonialism and how that history is shaping our current world. It's one of my favorites because none of the other theories like to look at the history through the Global South lens and discuss theory through that lens as well. So it kind of ignores how post-colonialism is going to cause things like conflict, how it's going to harm poverty, how it's going to affect income inequality within these nations. It's a really big issue that I think kind of gets ignored in all other IR theory. So what are the basics of post-colonialism? Like other theories within IR, their timeline starts after World War II. This is really because it's when Britain and a lot of other European nations decided that they were going to give their colonies independence. They didn't really decide it, a lot of colonies fought for it, but that's when they started gaining independence. So another thing they like to focus on is how colonial encounters play a role in both the colonized and the colonizer societies. So basically, the Global South and the Global North are both affected by post-colonialism to this day, whether post-colonialism is considered a positive or a negative for that nation. Another big issue is that the Global South has a lot of inequality and racial injustice within it. And the main question that post-colonial theorists like to look at is going to be how much post-colonialism are we currently in today? So the age of post-colonialism started after World War II, after colonies started to gain independence, but the effects are still in today. It's just how far are we into it, and if it is ever going to kind of end, if the nations are going to ever be able to get past the handicaps that a lot of that colonialism caused onto them. And there's a chance that they never really will, and that these inequalities will just never be justice. So Edward Said is considered the founder of post-colonialism. This is a picture of him right there. He liked to focus on two concepts, and those are going to be Orientalism and Eurocentrism. Both these concepts are really big within post-colonialism, and they explain a lot of what post-colonialism's issues are within not only society, but the study of IR. So Orientalism is the institutions and processes that help to establish European cultural superiority that allowed and were part of colonial expansions. Eurocentrism, on the other hand, is the analysis and explanations in IR to center Europe. Eurocentrism has been difficult to dismantle in both contemporary and critical IR. So Eurocentrism really focuses on the study of IR itself and how it's kind of left out post-colonialism and the Global South in its discussions, and post-colonialism really tries to bring them back into that talk and back into the study itself, and not always having to view things through the theories that were created by Europe and the Global North itself. So post-colonialism as a reaction. So what post-colonialists really are reacting to are that Eurocentrism, also the Orientalism, but the study is really focusing on the Eurocentrism because IR theories have ignored how colonialism and post-colonialism has affected international relations, politics, and economy, and how it's kind of continuing to affect those situations within every part of the world today. So post-colonialism, the response to this is to set out to bring different experiences and voices into the conversations of IR. They want to bring out the voices of the Global South and the areas that used to be colonized and bring them into the international relations study itself. And they want to bring these perspectives, and they're really hoping that the new perspectives are going to reveal new concerns, different priorities, and alternative life, words, and practices. Challenging traditional theories. Unlike other traditional IR theories, postcolonialism uses colonial and postcolonial history as a way to examine our world today. So many other theories actually do, especially critical theories, look at what they're looking at through a historical lens. But postcolonialism really focuses on the global south, and it's attempting to give them a voice. I really think this is important because the global south is such a big part of the world itself, and it's often ignored in order to bring up Western or global north voices. And I think postcolonialism, looking at the history, is going to bring up those voices and also explain why the global south is in the state that it is, and why the global north is also in the state that it is currently. So postcolonialism wants to reverse the idea that IR that is created in rich nations is more important than the global south's perspective. They really want to bring the global south's perspective into what is already established. They don't want to take away the current or more traditional theories. They just want people to also listen to the global south and how they're able to theorize about the international relations as well and their perspectives, and how colonialism and post-colonialism is still affecting them and us today. So one main issue that post-colonialists have are with liberals. So many liberal theorists argue that post-colonialism is an issue that should be addressed by humanitarian groups. The main issue with this perspective is that it relies on an Orientalist presumption that the global south is culturally behind. So basically, they're arguing humanitarian, by putting them with humanitarians, they're arguing that they can't culturally do these themselves and they're just behind the rest of the world. And they also suppose that the global south is incapable of managing its own issues and its own needs without outside assistance. And this assistance is normally within a Western perspective, and normally the assistance is coming from the global north. But the structure of their problems is really created by colonialism and post-colonialism, rather than being an issue that they can't just manage on their own. These issues weren't created by them to fix, basically. But they have to fix it. Key insights into post-colonialism. The main insight and the main takeaway is that they really like to focus on history, the history of colonialism, the history of post-colonialism, and how that history is affecting us today. So there are many current world operations like power, military strength, and economics that are still impacted by colonialism and post-colonialism. And other theories like realism and liberalism kind of ignore that these things happen and that these issues that they look at are oftentimes caused by colonialisms and the aftermath of that. So I have two examples here of the continuation of post-colonialism today and how it is still affecting us today. So the first one is going to be from the World Bank Development Report. So the report shows that countries that used to be colonized by Europe are doing poorly in both income generation and quality of life. And they're normally at the bottom of the list, but these issues can be looked at through a post-colonial lens, and you can see how colonialism and post-colonialism are affecting them and how that might be one of the causes for why they're lower on the totem pole than other nations that are above them. Another huge one here is going to be nuclear weapons. So wealthy nations, really like the United States and Russia or China, they all have nuclear weapons, but they kind of hoard them to themselves They argue that we should dismantle nuclear weapons, but they only keep them from nations they don't believe are deserving enough to have them. They argue that they're kind of not trustworthy and they're not deserving and cannot be responsible for that type of military strength, and that basically they're accusing them of going to do something horrific, but they're still maintaining these weapons themselves. So, post-colonial feminist. So, other theories kind of relate to post-colonialism, but the main one that I'm going to look at today is the post-colonial feminist. The post-colonial feminist is a sector of feminism. It's only a part of it, but it's kind of new and it's emerging and to look at post-colonialism through a feminist lens. So the main difference here between post-colonialism and feminism, post-colonial feminism, is that post-colonial feminists are going to look at post-colonialism through a woman's perspective. They often look at things like inequality that is caused by giving these global south women putting all this work in for very little money, and other nations benefiting that, and their wealth is built off the back of these global south women. And both of them, rather than looking at the world through a universal perspective, they like to focus on the global south through both gendered and racial perspectives and see how that is affecting the world. And they both attempt to move away from the universal perspective that is created by traditional IR theories, and they want to focus on the history and politics of the global south, and not only in how post-colonialism has created that, but for post-colonial feminists, they want to look how it not only created that, but it's harming women specifically, and how the patriarchy is continued there in a different way. So this is an example of how post-colonialism is still part of our day-to-day, and many of these nations in the global south are still hugely affected by the decisions that were made when they were given independence, or the aftermath of how colonialism harmed them in the first place. So what I'm going to look at is going to be India and Pakistan. So Pakistan and India were given independence by the British partition in 1947. So the British partition was established by the Indian Independence Act, and what it did was it divided Muslim majority into Pakistan and Hindu majority into India. The divided regions, it divided the regions of Jammu and Kashmir. So these are pretty diverse regions, and both India and Pakistan claimed to have those regions, and many conflicts have been happening ever since because of the British partition. So after 1947, 1957 through 1948 was the Indo-Pakistan War. So what really catalyzed this war was Kashmir decided to join India to stop invading Pakistan herders from attacking them. The war did end with the Karachi Agreement of 1949, and that established a ceasefire. In 1965 through 1974, there was more conflict, more war, and more tension that built up after that war ended. So the war breaks out over East Pakistan. There was the Simla Agreement of 1972 that established the line of control and kind of simmered everything down a little bit, but then India got nuclear weapons. They started testing them, and this just raised the tension in the area right back up in 1974. Now, from 1974 through 2019, there are many conflicts, many deployments of troops, many attackers, what some would consider terrorists, attacking the other nation for these same regions, Jammu and Kashmir. So, but in 2019, after there were many deployments of troops to the region, India decided to revoke the Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, thus removing special status to Jammu and Kashmir. What this basically did was that the Article 370 allowed Jammu and Kashmir to kind of make their own laws, and they weren't completely under Indian control. But after that removal, they all had to basically tend to the laws that affected things like how they pay for property, the taxes, everything in their lives kind of changed, and they had to conform to India now, where they before were kind of more of themselves. So this really upset the Kashmiris, and it was viewed as a grave injustice by Pakistan. So currently, this is still in place, and there are still many issues with India and Pakistan fighting each other over these regions. Many areas of the region are still upset to this day. And the war is continuing. So here are the different perspectives of the partition. So these 3 different perspectives are from a scholarly article that demonstrated the different perspectives of the partition within textbooks in India, Pakistan, and Britain, how they displayed what was going on at the time and the causes of the conflicts. So the Indian textbooks on the partition praise the Indian National Congress, and they oftentimes argue and praise national unity. National unity is a huge part of the Indian textbooks. They really try to focus in on that. So the textbook also blames the British partition, the British policy of the divide and rule for the creation of the Muslim League. The Muslim League is tied to Pakistan, and India does not like the Muslim League. The textbook accuses the Muslim League of being violent and obstructing the Indian unity, which the Indian unity, like I said earlier, is a huge thing for India. They really want their nation to be unified under India. So Pakistan had a little bit of a different perspective. It liked to focus on historical figures at the time, and it really praised those historical figures. And it also celebrated the Muslim freedom from the Hindu rule. The book accused India of conspiring against the Muslim cause. It also talks badly about Gandhi and claims that Britain needs to address the issue of Pakistan before India. It goes on to discuss a conspiracy between Britain and India against Muslim rule. So there are a lot of conspiracies here that they think that Britain and India were conspiring against them, that they gave them less land on purpose, they gave them less of a region on purpose, and that they're trying to basically harm Pakistan because it's Muslim ruled. And in Britain's textbook, this was only a small part of the British textbook, but it specifically discusses Mountbatten, and it actually is through his perspective that you learn about the partition, and it really justifies the partition and his decision to separate these nations and how he separated these nations. So it describes that the decision was an inevitable decision that Mountbatten had to take at the time, and that the history was just lining up for the partition to take place. But the textbook also used colonial phrases such as Rahman often caused savage mob violence. So, post-colonial India, Pakistan, and Britain. So looking at the partition of the India-Pakistan regions after British colonialism, through a post-colonial lens, each side had a completely different story on the situation, what caused it, how the partition affected them, and where their grievances are all completely different, and they also blame each other the entire time. So India and Pakistan both blame Britain for different things and for completely different reasons, but they also both blame each other for things like harming national unity or conspiring against them to cause them to be less of a nation than they really should be. And Britain argues that the partition had to be done, and then uses the colonial language, kind of dismissing India and Pakistan within the partition itself. So each of these ignores the violence that came from the partition that was happening at the time of the partition. And the partition by Britain really continues to be a problem today in the region of India. It specifically with the issue of revoking Article 370, it just shows that there's continued violence here, there's continued tensions here, and that these things have not been resolved, but they're made by a post-colonial decision that was not India's or Pakistan's decision in the first place, but these issues are just continuing. So British involvement along with the additives in the region are needed to better understand the conflict in this region. It's not something you could really throw away with a realist point of view that it's just war and they're going to do this to take over each other. In reality, there's a lot more that goes into this conflict, specifically because of post-colonialism. And I really think it's a great example of how post-colonialism is still a major factor today, and it's not going away, especially for these nations that see these conflicts on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. And here's my works cited. Thank you for hearing about post-colonialism. I hope I demonstrated it well. Thank you. Bye.